Right, folks. Well, Renee Carignan joins us now on the Right the Dog stage. So Renee works for Heap, and it's been there now for 4 years. Yeah, close to 5, right? So in this presentation, Renee will share insights into metrics that can help you gauge whether or not readers are happy with your docs through the philosophy of what they call data-driven docs. You'll also get a handy set of metrics you can take home and experiment with as well. So Renee recently spent 1 year as a digital nomad. She spent time in 15 different countries, including Madagascar, Macau, and Mexico. She also loves to nerd out in sci-fi, video games, graphic novels, anime, and has even cosplayed as She-Ra in Spider-Gwen. And last, but definitely not least, Renee is a lifelong singer. I've got so many questions, Renee, but they're going to have to wait for the break. Please welcome Renee Carignan.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Jared. I will not be singing during any part of this talk. But maybe later tonight. Yes, I'm so excited to be here with you all to share my talk I like to call it's lovingly called Find the Frequency, Metrics for Better Docs and Happier Readers. And so I know you just got an overview. I'll share a little bit more about who I am and why I'm here. I'm a technical writer and also a people manager of one at Heap. Heap is a product analytics startup, and that is why I have become such a big nerd for data and product analytics. As you can hear from my accent, I am not from Australia. I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was really wonderful to come over and have some adventures here and meet all of you. I'm a really big nerd, as Jared mentioned. One fun fact I wanted to share about me is I'm such a data nerd and also a sci-fi video games nerd that I have spreadsheets when I play video games to track my metrics throughout the games. That's how far down it goes. People are always like, how do you do that? I'm I get joy out of it. But if you ever want to talk about gaming metrics, I'm here. And yeah, I'm an endlessly data-driven, curious person. I'm always thinking about metrics. Of course, I love my Spotify Wraps. I actually want more out of my Spotify Wrapped. I might email them and give them feedback. And the other fact is that this is my first time giving a talk of this caliber. I've done a lightning talk at Portland before, but this is my first big 30-minute talk. So if I stumble a little bit or there are rough patches, we'll just get through it together. And I'm, if this mic fails, we will figure it out. And so why are we here? Why am I giving you this talk? So we're all documentarians, and we want to make sure that our readers are happy. And how do we do that? I'm giving this talk to give you an overview of the metrics. In my years of working at Heap, there are certain metrics that I have found useful and certain metrics that I have found to not be as useful. And so I'm going to start off by laying the groundwork of what metrics are. And then I'm going to go through a 3-part where I talk about noisy metrics, which these are metrics that I have not found value in. Part 2 will be talking about the metrics that I have found the most useful. So what I really want is for you all to walk away with a handy set of metrics that you can get started in your docs using free or cheap tools and not requiring too much implementation. And then part 3 is I use the word advanced, but it's kind of fine-tuning. It's metrics for if you really want to dive deeper, if you have the budget, if you have the time to do some interesting implementation work. And then I'll close out with some advice for how to continue what I like to call a data-driven docs practice. So, what is a metric? When I was developing this talk, this is a term that I delved into deeply. And at the highest level, a metric is just a measurement of something, right? So when you're baking, you might look at cups of flour. And these are the reason why we measure metrics at all in any capacity is to figure out if we or other people are making progress, right? So if you're training to run a marathon, maybe you're measuring how many miles or kilometers you're able to run each day as you build yourself up. And so when it comes to docs, we use metrics to try to answer this fundamental question of, are your docs actually helping people, right? When they visit your docs, are they coming away happy? Are they succeeding at what they were trying to do when they came to your docs? And so I'm gonna get into what I call the noise, and I'm using this metaphor of a radio, you tune static and then you try to tune in and you find the frequency. And so these are what I like to call noisy metrics. And these are metrics where you may think there's gonna be some value, or other teams may tell you, oh, there's value in these metrics, but that I personally have not found value in. And I wanna add a caveat here that yes, I work at a product analytics company. Yes, I've spent a lot of time on this, but I'm not a supreme authority on this subject. And so there may be metrics in here that you have gotten some value out of. And if that is the case, I would love to hear from you. Please come find me after this talk, or you could do like a counter talk, the lightning talk session, and be like, actually, I found this metric really useful. But that's just my caveat, is that in my personal exploration of these metrics, I have found them to be red herrings, so I wanted to share that with you in case you delve into these metrics. And so noise, again, these are metrics. My core definition of a metric that is valuable to track is if it actually changes your docs. You look at the metric and you say, okay, this doc needs to change, or the layout of our homepage needs to change, or we need to restructure this doc in a specific way. There's something that moves the needle to help make your documents better. And so the opposite of that, noise, are metrics that don't provide any insights. You look at the metric and you're like, yep, that's a number, and then that's kind of it. So the first metric that I want to talk about is sessions. And sessions is a very common baseline metric. Like if you jump into an analytics tool, it's giving you kind of a walkthrough. Sessions is something it may point you to. And for those who haven't heard of it, a session is the duration of time when the user starts and stops engaging with your website or app. Most of the time with Google Analytics measures this as ending after 30 minutes of no user activity. In mobile, this is if you put the app in the foreground for 2 minutes. And the thing about this is that if you don't know what happened in that session, there's not valuable data, right? So maybe the user opened the tab and walked away, or with other tabs, we all do this, right? Maybe the user did something really interesting that you really want to know about, but you don't know that from just looking at sessions. And the other reason why I consider it noise and I don't really dig into sessions anymore is that it's a very passive type of engagement. It's not active, it doesn't really demonstrate an intent. And so I want to advise, if you're delving into metrics, sessions is something, and you may play around with sessions and find some value out of it, but that is where I have landed with sessions. Bounce rate. So bounce rate is something that marketers love. And if any of you partner with marketing and marketers, we'll talk about the bounce rate. And for those who haven't heard of it, the bounce rate is a single page session where users exited your site after the session. It's basically a session of 0 sessions, 0 seconds. And in my time investigating bounce rate, the reason why I found it noisy is that you don't have any information on why the user bounced. You don't even know sometimes if the user, sometimes bots generate these bounce rate numbers. And so this is one of those metrics where I would have a chart for it and I would look at it and say, oh, okay, this is our bounce rate, and I wouldn't actually do anything with it. So I eventually stopped tracking it. And so that is where things are with bounce rate. Average time spent on page. So measurements of time are always really interesting, right? The last two metrics have also touched on time, and this is calculated as the time spent on your whole site divided by the number of page views. Different tools may calculate it differently, but that's kind of a general high-level definition. And the reason why this is noise is, again, it's the same as sessions. It doesn't give you any information on what they actually did when they went to the page. So maybe you find that a user spent 6 minutes on your homepage, but what did they actually do on the homepage? And so these kind of time-based metrics can be really tricky. Scroll depth. So this is a really interesting one. I have spent so much time hacking away at scroll depth trying to make this valuable. And it sounds so cool. So it is a measurement of how far down a user has scrolled on your page. Usually I set it up as percentages. Some people use it as pixels. So it'll look at something like a metric where the user scrolled 25% of the way down the page. And the reason why I found this to be kind of an actionable insight is that it's calculated very poorly and accurately. There's a lot of factors that can influence scroll depth. For example, the type of device that they're using, could be how zoomed in they were. If you have like a 2 to 3 column layout, you don't know where in the site they actually went. So if you try to recreate that user's experience, like you go to your website and you scroll 25% of the way down, that may not be where they ended. So it doesn't actually give you too much insight into the user's intent, to why they were doing this, what they were trying to accomplish. And so I think I've tried like 5 different implementations of scroll depth at this point, and I eventually just abandoned tracking it as a metric. So again, I advise you that this one tends to be red herring. If somebody in here has figured out how to make scroll depth work, I would love to hear from you. And last but not least, in this one, I'm going to talk about this metric throughout the talk. So this may be a bit controversial, but this, how do we do call to action? So what this generally looks like is like a thumbs up, thumbs down click. It may be like a sad face to a happy face. It may be a 1 through 5 ranking. It depends on which tool you're using. And the thing is, this on its own, when it's just these whole numbers of these clicks, this means very little when you don't actually get comments attached, because everybody thinks of these these call to action in a different way. Like everyone has a different reason for clicking thumbs up, thumbs down. The example that I like to give is sort of the restaurant review. So, you look at a restaurant, you're thinking of going out to dinner tonight, and you see it's got 3 out of 5 stars. And then you look at one of the 3 out of 5 star reviews, and it says like, this is the best food I've ever had. I proposed to my wife at this restaurant. The service was excellent. I had a ratatouille moment, but I took 2 stars off because there was no parking. So your definition of why you would leave 3 out of 5 stars and somebody else's definition are so different that it's really hard to get value out of these metrics without that extra context. And so the reason why I have this in the noise section is because when you just have it as these full numbers, it tends to not give you any valuable insight. I will talk about this metric again later when I talk about how to make it useful. All right, so we've laid the groundwork of metrics that feel noisy, and now here in part 2, I'm going to talk about the metrics that I have found useful. So we already talked about this a little bit. What is not noise is when you're actually able to tune in on the frequency, you're able to get that why, that context, the intent. So these are metrics that actually help you change your docs in some way. They unearth actionable insights or areas for improvement. The first metric, and this is sort of a counterpoint to sessions, is page views. So a page view is exactly as it sounds. It is an instance of a view of a page or a screen if you're on mobile, being loaded in a browser. And this is useful because it's a very simple, precise, straightforward metric. And you can dig into it from a lot of different angles. So the most common type of analysis, and I now have visuals for each of these types of analysis. As a baseline, looking at just your page views per month gives you a sense of general site traffic. I recommend viewing this per month because you will get a sense of what is normal versus abnormal, and that is what is highly useful about these metrics as well. So, a common thing, for example, is you'll see that during the holidays, your docs traffic may dip. And if you have a general sense of that, you'll know what is a normal dip versus like an abnormal dip, like something is wrong. And you'll be able to compare this to like last year's holidays, like maybe you see actually it's 5% up from last year's holidays. You'll be able to compare month over month. And you'll also be able to do a thing where you can organize it, you can filter it by the specific pages that are the most popular. And it's really valuable for you to know what is the normal level of popularity of your docs versus when something is spiking in popularity. So I think a really common thing is your most popular features are going to end up being your most popular docs, or just your docs homepage. For example, API's overview is really common. But maybe one month you notice that there's like a troubleshooting doc that is spiking in popularity. And that is really interesting. Maybe that's product feedback that a lot of people are hitting this error. Maybe you want to take a look, like that doc normally doesn't get many views. You want to double check that it's actually giving content that's actually useful for users. So this is something that I recommend tracking as a baseline just to have familiarity with your docs. All right, clicks. Clicks are so powerful. And it's exactly as it sounds. It's defined as when a user clicks or on mobile, they may tap on a page or screen. And the reason why this is useful is that this demonstrates an interactivity. This demonstrates an intent, right? People don't, when they leave tab browsers open, they may not be on your site, but when they're clicking around on your site, they are trying to do something. They are trying to succeed. And so analyzing clicks is where you can figure out if they were successful and help them get there. And so there are so many ways you can use clicks. Like I could give a whole other talk on just clicks analysis. But at the highest level, the very baseline I would recommend is analyze clicks on the table of contents. And the reason why this is valuable is it gives you insight into how people are using your docs. Are they using them in the chronological way that you want them to use them? So you may have a guide that is set up as steps 1 through 8. And in your mind as the docs writer, you know people will succeed if they do all these steps. But then you analyze clicks and you notice that everyone's just clicking step 6 in the table of contents and just jumping to that step. And you can look into why, like maybe go reread step 6 and see what is the value there. Maybe you want to reorganize it, you want to move step 6 up. You want to add context in step 6 to enable them if they did skip all those other steps. Maybe step 6 should be its own doc, right? Maybe it's some really important thing that is a little bit different from the other steps. But looking at clicks on page elements is a really valuable way to see where are users finding value or where are they looking for things so that you can organize the page in a way that helps them. All right, a step up from clicks is heat maps. So heat maps are so cool. If you haven't seen them before, they're a graphical representation of data where the values are depicted in a color-coded way. So if you've seen the Predator movie, you know how the Predator, he's looking at heat signatures of people of his prey. That's kind of what it looks like. And I'm going to jump directly to the slide that shows the visual because I think that helps it click for people. So this is a heat map of our help center, and you can see here where the most common clicks are. Let me see if it's rendering up here. Yep. So you can see that the number one action people take is they click on the search bar, right? We know to prioritize focusing on our search experience from this. And we also see that a lot of people, you can't really see it from here, but they're clicking developers. So people are coming to our help center and they're saying, oh, actually, I want to go to the dev docs instead. And this actually resulted in a couple of changes. Like we moved the developers, it used to be on the right and we moved it to the left to enable people to get to that faster. And we've also made sure to always prioritize search as an important element on our homepage. So if there's anything you take away from this talk, and if you don't have access to like a paid heat map tool, I highly recommend just doing a free trial and just doing your homepage. Like that alone will give you some really valuable insights into the layout of that page, which is your first impression with users and whether it's getting them where they want to be. All right, so speaking of search, since I know and learned from our help center that search is the most common action users take, it's really valuable to delve into search in two different ways. The first one is to look at the most, actually before I jump into the recommended analysis, I want to talk about why it's useful. Search is the most valuable piece of information because the users are literally telling you why they came to the docs. You know, they are maybe typing in a question form, maybe they're typing an error message, but it is the best way to get that context, that intent, the task the user was trying to complete so that you can set up your docs in a way to make them successful. And so there are two different types of ways that I recommend analyzing search. The first example is just to look at the most common search terms. And again, you want to look at this as a regular cadence. I recommend looking at it monthly so that you get familiar with what's really common and what isn't. So maybe the most common searches are for your latest features, and you know, like every time you look, you always see the same things. And then suddenly you notice a really like unique term popping up in your most common search. And you can think about whether you have the correct docs experience for that. Something that I highly recommend doing, something that we do as a practice at HEAP, is every quarter, I go through the search experience for the top 20 most common search terms. So I open up our help center, I search the term session, and I double check if what's showing up as the top 5 search results actually aligns with what I want the user to see. So as an example of something that we changed based on this data is when users were searching for mobile, I was hoping they would find this cross-platform tracking guide that we have that users have given a lot of good feedback on. But I discovered that they weren't finding that because the title and the SEO of that doc focused on iOS and Android. It did not have the term mobile. So I was able to update that doc so that it would show up in searches for mobile and help users who are looking for that information succeed. And so when you do this, when you recreate the most common search UX, you end up experiencing what the user experiences, and you end up ensuring that there's a happy, successful outcome for a lot of users doing your most common searches. So searches with no results is also a valuable type of data point to look at. What I will say about it is 80% of what you get is noise. You're gonna get a lot of like weird, like anyone who's looked at this knows there's like a lot of weird spam messages. You get things like, you get the names of platforms that you don't support. So like we always see like Flutter SDK or Xamarin SDK. And, you know, that may be feedback for product of like, hey, people keep searching for this, but it's really not actionable. But where this is actionable is where you get things where you know there is supposed to be a search term. So maybe, for example, your competitor has a different feature name, but you have 2 features that are the same, but they have different names in each platform. And you know that you want users, maybe they're coming over from that platform, you want them to be able to find the equivalent in your docs. You see that they're searching for that, and you can configure your search in such a way that they do actually find the equivalent feature so they can move forward. Or maybe they're searching for an error message, and you realize that the doc that you wrote on how to troubleshoot that error didn't actually contain the error message, or the error message may have changed in some way. So even though 80% of this will be noise, the 20% you get will be so valuable that it is worth tracking. Last but not least, so I told you I would loop back to the call to action here. So the way that you make this actionable is that you have to make sure that you're collecting comments and contact info. So this might be a little bit of a controversial recommendation, but something that we did that increased the quality of the input from here is requiring an email address and requiring a minimum character count of a comment in order to submit. Now you will see a decrease in the actual just clicks on that because people aren't going through the flow to submit. Or I should say you'll see a decrease in submissions. But the quality you get will be a lot better because people will stop and they will think about what they're submitting before they submit it. I think that having that contact info available too kind of increases the quality as well. And so I'm going to show you a visual example of what this looks like for us. So this is a mock-up of the table that we look at when we're seeing this feedback. And some of this is going to be immediately actionable. OB here says the free trial link isn't working. You can go into the doc and fix the broken link. In some cases, it might be a little bit vague. You might be not sure where to take this. So, Vader here just says that it's not detailed enough, wants more things spelled out. Maybe you can use the email address to check, has Vader contacted your support team? If you use something like Zendesk, you can go and search with the email, and maybe there's a support interaction that you can use to make the doc better. Or if you can't find something somewhere else, you can just reach out directly. We do this, we say, hi, we're the docs team, we got your feedback, we would love to know more, like which step did you get stuck on? Maybe we're gonna loop in support to help you succeed in some way, but it just allows you to get that extra context, and having the opportunity to engage directly with your readers and makes them happy is also an invaluable part of this. Okay, I know that I've thrown a lot of information at you while the caffeine is still kicking in, so bear with me. I'm gonna talk to you about a few additional interesting metrics, and then we will talk a little bit more about your holistic docs practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about metrics that may take a little bit more time or tooling. And this is an example of something that I want to recommend to you, which is you're looking at whole numbers, it's better to try to transform them into percentages in some way in relation to something else. So this is another example using the CTA. So your documentation satisfaction rate, the way that we measure it is clicks on either the thumbs up only or the thumbs down only, divided by the number of clicks on thumbs up or thumbs down. So for example, maybe you had 50 clicks on either one, and you had 30 clicks on thumbs up, that gives you a percentage value. And the reason why percentages are more valuable is because it automatically contextualizes the metric that you're looking at. So this is just a visual example of what that would look like. And it can let you know if something is trending down, right? So maybe you see that the satisfaction rate of your most popular guide is suddenly trending down. Like more people are doing thumbs down or less people are doing thumbs up, and you can look into that. Another example of percentages I like to give is, let's say that you publish a brand new guide following a big marketing push for a new feature, and then you report out to the product team that, okay, we saw 400 people open that guide. And that sounds really good until you compare a percentage of that's only 4% of the users who got the marketing email. And so depending on your definition of success, this percentage gives you a way to contextualize that example. Journeys. So the word journeys may not be what all these analytics tools refer to this as, but you want to look at instances where users are going from your doc site to somewhere else. You can also look at the vice versa if they're coming from somewhere else into your doc site. And the most common and obvious version of this is for someone going from docs to your app, right? So they read a troubleshooting guide to fix an error. You tell them go into the app and do X, Y, and Z. Did they actually follow and do that? Another common one is if you partner with support to try to get support input to make your docs better, is looking at the amount of people who looked at your docs and then went and opened a support ticket. And then you can even look at those support tickets and look at the docs they came from to figure out how could you have written that doc in such a way that the user was able to self-serve before having to go and contact support. Other common types, sales and marketing content. Are marketing efforts driving users to want to learn more in docs? Like maybe they release an ebook that drives them to your docs, or they send an email blast. This is a really valuable data point to look at. A change that I've ended up making out of this is sometimes you find out that the content that marketing has written, like maybe they wrote a blog post on a new feature, is so similar to the doc that when people jump from one to the other, they're like, oh, I've already seen this. And so it may help you be a little bit intentional about the holistic content journey across your product. If you have something like a community, like you have a forum where people can talk about your product, checking if people are posting in community after visiting your docs. Like maybe they didn't get their question answered in docs, they go and post it in community. This is similar to support in that maybe you can integrate that question into your docs. And then last but definitely not least, if you have the ability to track your 404 page in some way, this is really valuable just for making those important fixes. So maybe you can see the page that they were on before they hit the 404, and that gives you insight into something going on with your doc site, like a broken link that you can fix to make your docs experience better. Okay, session replays. So for those who haven't heard of it, session replay is a visual reproduction of your site. It's like someone stood over your shoulder with a camera and recorded while you were using the site. It's a little bit creepy. But this is like a hot new technology. I don't know how new it is actually, but it's definitely making waves these days. And the value of it is obvious, right? Every action is contextualized by the action before it. So you don't need to wonder where did the user go after they did the search. You can see things like, did they retype the search? Like maybe they typed one thing and they deleted it. There's a lot of context here. It really is the full journey. And something I recommend if you're delving into session replay analysis is to pair it with other metrics as a way to drill down. So for example, if you are looking at that funnel of users who jump from your doc site to support, pull up the session replay related to that experience, and you can see what they were doing. Maybe they scrolled down to step 4, maybe they did a search for something that had no results, but that will just give you insight into how you can make your docs better. All right, I know I've thrown a lot at you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, as you start to put together all of these charts, as you delve into these tools, how can you cultivate what I like to call a data-driven docs practice? And so as you're getting started, something I touched on is figuring out your regular cadence for these metrics. There's a handful of metrics that I review on a monthly basis. There's a few that I review on a quarterly basis. I have a block of calendar time to remind myself to do this. I review these metrics with other people as well. We have those standing meetings to look at them together. And this will give you a sense of the regular, like what is normal in your docs versus what is not. This will really cultivate your sense of noise when you do this, because you will know what is a typical experience. And decide your audience for these metrics, right? There are some metrics that only you are going to be interested in as a documentarian. There may be metrics that your product team really wants to hear about, like, for example, the searches that you know results that are related to features we don't have. Maybe the execs need a metric they want you to report out. Maybe marketing wants to partner with you, support. Defining your audience can help you to partner with those teams better so that you can all use data to inform what you do. And kind of related to this is report out on the value of your metrics practice. So I've given a lot of examples of ways in which I've actually used these metrics to change docs. If you share that with other people, first of all, it makes you look good at your job, which is never bad. And it enables you to justify the budget for more metrics tooling. And it kind of empowers like a data-driven culture among your team. So like the example that I gave where I did the top 20 searches, the first time I ever did that, I ended up having to change 11 of the searches. Which on one hand was a little bit of like, ouch, like the search was not good, but it was also so exciting to know that now the search experience is so much better. And I shared that with people. And everyone was really excited, and customers gave better feedback, and everything was good. And so if you continue to report out on, this is what I'm actually doing with these metrics, this will benefit everyone. And so, okay, you're a few months in, you're maintaining this data-driven docs practice, you have these calendar events where you're looking at metrics. Some advice that I would give is to regularly audit and trim down your metrics practice. So if a metric stops being valuable in some way, drop it. Maybe there's a metric I gave you that because of your product or the way your docs are set up, it's not actually useful for you. Please don't use it. If something is not actually moving the needle for you, don't waste your time on it. And related to that is to always make time to play around. So sometimes it's easy to get stagnant where, every month you're looking at these same 5 metrics, make some time to play around. Maybe there's some kind of new metric tool that's come out. Maybe your product has changed in such a way that you want to look at things from a different angle. Following along with analytics industry trends, like, the Write the Doc Slack has that analytics channel. Always make time to kind of play around and explore and recultivate your practice a little bit. And related to that, experiment with different tools, right? Maybe you need to do free trials if you lack budget. Maybe you can ask around about what other teams are using. Maybe your marketing team is using a really cool visualization tool that you can get added to as a user. Finding different ways to just experiment and learn more and keep growing is a way that you can maintain this practice in a way that continues to be effective. And last but not least, some key takeaways for your ongoing practice. My number one is to never take any term at face value. So there are some terms that you've been introduced to in this talk, session, bounce rate, scroll depth, that they sound really cool. They're like, oh, I want to delve into these metrics. But then when you actually unpack what they actually are, they are not valuable to you as a docs practitioner. And so always be looking under the hood. Anytime there's like a new cool term, unpack it. Find out what exactly that is. Is that going to have value to you? As I talked about in the Part 3, percentages and comparisons are where you will find a lot of value. Having the context and comparison is really key. So if you're ever looking at a whole number, try to think of a way in which you can contextualize it and make it a percentage. And just to close out, the thing that I kept saying this whole talk, the context and the why of user behavior is what matters most. If you want to serve your users and make them successful, you need to know why they're doing what they are doing. And so that's it for me. Thank you all so much. I'm going to be here for the Q&A, and if you have feedback or memes, you can find me around the conference. And
So, folks, have you got any questions, any thoughts about that presentation you saw today? Just pop your hand up and we'll go and grab your questions right from the audience. I'll just replay that. So that we're talking about least paid views and the value of least paid views here. What's your take on that?
Yes. So something that I didn't get into this talk is looking at docs that what I call are like losing user trust in some way or at risk in some way. And when we look at least viewed docs, we do this quarterly analysis of them where we think about, well, why are they the least viewed? Like maybe it's just an unpopular feature. Maybe something about the doc isn't discoverable. And we ask ourselves what we can do about that if there's something we need to change about that. So yes, I do recommend investigating least viewed docs. Thanks.
That's great. That's an excellent question. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? Yes.
On that one.
All right. So funnels and pathways. What can you give us about that?
Yes. Oh, I could give a whole separate talk about funnels. So funnels are really interesting. I actually had some slides that I took out about funnels because it ended up being too much content. But I do absolutely find values in funnels. Like the journeys from docs to support is a funnel that you can measure. Your search experience, I have a search UX funnel that I measure. I absolutely find value in that. And in paths, so when I talked about journeys, journeys kind of can beat paths. I'm not sure if that's like the way they're using that term, but yeah, there's absolutely value in those metrics as well.
Great question. Okay. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask?
Yeah.
So that question was about smaller sets of documentation and what metrics you should be focusing on for those smaller groups of docs. What's your view on that there?
Yes, so I find when I'm looking at percentages, you get to a point where you have to double check the whole number to contextualize the percentage. So you may see that a doc had 200% increase in views, and that sounds amazing, but then you look at it's like, it went from 4 to 12 or something, right? Like it was just not a doc that got many views, and then if you actually dig into the views, it was like not that interesting. Like it was someone on your, support team who looked at it again. And so when it's hard, yeah, it's challenging when it's a small number of things. You just have to always keep that in mind, the context as you're looking at these metrics to find something that is really interesting to dig into versus something that is a little bit of a red herring.
Excellent. Okay. We might have time for one more question if someone has one they'd like to ask. So Wendy's question was about finding the time and developing a habit for looking at metrics. How can you start doing that in your day-to-day job?
I feel like this relates back to the general finding time for all of that like low priority, high impact work. Like you said, we're fighting fires all day. And I think that looks different for everybody. Like some people put that stuff in the morning or in the afternoon. I think that making sure like you are assessing through the noise and always getting value is a way, it's a way to sort of philosophically value it, but really it's just having that calendar block and committing yourself to it. I think that would be a really interesting discussion about how we prioritize that type of work. That's all the advice I've got.
That's good advice. All right, well, folks, that's what we've got time for now. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Renee Carignan, folks. Give her a round of applause. Great, really insightful.